Right, okay, we're recording. Excellent. I'm here today for episode number 14 of Parkour Coach Companion with Dan Edwards. And I'm very excited to talk to this man who helped me get my level 1 certificate in parkour coaching. So welcome, Dan. Big welcome.
Thanks, Sam. It's really good to be here. A real pleasure.
Thank you. I feel like last episode, which was with Chris Grant, was quite prescriptive. I had like a kind of a set of questions and kind of just basically grilled him about loads of stuff.
Right.
I want to ease off that for this episode and just have it a bit more free flowing and kind of have your thoughts on a variety of different things. Nothing too interrogative, if that makes sense.
Cool.
So first of all, thank you for coming on. And essentially, for people who don't know who you are, who is Dan Edwards? Who are you?
Just a guy that jumps around, pretty much. It's about it. How far do you want to go back, man? I mean, I was born in '75, so it's a long time ago now. Certainly for the parkour scene, my life's had a weird and interesting path. I grew up in sort of in martial arts and really fanatically in martial arts and sort of practical skill development and survival skills and all this kind of stuff. Kids that grew up in the 80s generally wanted to be action heroes, right? So certainly boys anyway, and we I was one of them. So I sort of wanted to be like someone like that. So I was learning those skills, and I just took it very seriously, I guess, and took that development of physicality very seriously. And then so most of my teenage years were spent in pretty intensive training in that way and sort of academia. And then I went to university, did undergrad, postgrad degrees there, still training, and then went to Japan, lived there for 5 years to train in a very sort of specific fighting art that you can only train in Japan. And then came back to London, 2004, 2005. And by then I'd already started training in parkour. Around that time, parkour just sort of was consuming my life. It became a profession eventually. And we kind of, I suppose in some ways we created the profession of parkour, I suppose. We were some of the first professional parkour athletes, performance-wise, and certainly coaching. I guess we were the first ones delivering formal classes anywhere in the world, I think, as far as I know. So, and then from there, Parkour Generations and Adapt and Parkour UK and all the other things that we built back then until now. So that's kind of the potted history, I suppose.
And just thinking back to when you first started making, as you said, like professional elements of parkour, coaching and performance and stuff, I can imagine that must have felt quite scary to do, because obviously you were at the forefront of that, and it was something that very, very few people understood. They don't know what this thing is, and then you're kind of there thinking, well, yeah, we can produce coaches, we can do performances. So how was it? What was the feeling like at that time?
It wasn't scary at all. I mean, it was hugely exciting and great fun, because we were a small community back then. Everyone knew everyone around the world at that stage. Pretty much, there were a handful of practitioners in a few countries. So everyone knew everyone. I was very lucky to train with the French guys, the founders, and start working with them, Stéphane Vigroux and guys like this. And the performance element came first. Obviously, there were, I think Steph and David and those guys in France did the first kind of adverts in like 1998, 99 were the first sort of parkour adverts. So they were the first commercial jobs using parkour, I suppose. And it was basically performance stuff until about 2003, 4. That was pretty much all that happened. And it was fun. You were traveling around the world with your friends doing performance work on this discipline that no one knew, no one understood. So you kind of felt it was a very small community, and you kind of felt like you were part of something very special and very secret in a way, because it was back then. When I began training when I came back to London and was training here in the summers between the UK and Japan, there were probably 7 or 8 people in London training at that time, and we'd meet up on Thursday evenings and at South Bank, and that was it. And you knew you were the only people in the entire city that were doing that activity. So that is a pretty interesting feeling and a very special feeling in some ways. And we were very, I feel very, very lucky to have experienced that, because very few people get to experience the birth of a discipline like that and be involved in it. So it was actually a really interesting time and a really exciting time. We were super passionate about what we did. And then when it came to teaching, that was a natural progression. So my background obviously was in academia, and I was a lecturer in Japan and a teacher of martial arts. So I'd studied these things, and being involved in the academic circuit, I'd also been involved in creating examinations and testing people and all this sort of stuff. So I sort of knew the criteria for that sort of thing. So it was a natural kind of progression for me, and particularly Forrest as well, Francois Maup, who'd been a PT instructor in the military, and a physical trainer and all this sort of stuff, and a high-level athlete. Together, but we began the teaching of parkour pretty much formally, and we both had experience, so we kind of knew how to create a structure, how to create a class, a method, a training program, how to build discipline into it. We'd come from very disciplined backgrounds ourselves, so we sort of understood the benefits of that and how to sort of convey that. But then we had to find ways to how do we take parkour training and how we train and give that to people. So how do we put the content in? But it was sort of a natural progression in some ways for us, and it was really exciting, really interesting. Because no one had ever done it. I think the first classes we ran were 2004, I think. And yeah, no one had ever done it. And it was really, really interesting to see the response, which was huge at the time. The classes very quickly were over full. And, it was great fun. The classes were super tough back then. They were like really no mercy classes at all. We basically just thought, right, well, we're going to introduce people to how we train. And obviously the fact that I was training with Steph and Forrest and Yamakasi and these guys, our training was very, very hard, I suppose. So we just thought, well, this is what we must give people, because this is what gives us the benefit. So we found ways to make it more approachable and scalable with our teaching background, but effectively we wanted people to understand and to experience that. And they loved it. So the classes would like double in number every week. No matter how hard we made it, the people would just go away and say, this class is ridiculously hard, you should come and try it. And it became incredibly popular. And I think I put a lot of the success and growth of parkour teaching in the early years down to the fact that it was very tough. And that people who had not experienced things like that before enjoyed that. Because I think people like that. They like to be challenged. There's certainly a huge percentage of the human population that really, really embrace and enjoy challenge and sort of viscerally understand the benefits of it. So I think a lot of the success of the early years of parkour development was that difficulty in terms of how hard it is as a discipline. Certainly for me, that's why I love the discipline, because it's so hard. That's what drew me to it in the first place.
Mm. And on the back of that, how was your chain store massacre, which I believe was just over this last weekend, right?
Yeah, it's always on Halloween. It's a great event. It was really good this year. We obviously capped the numbers because of COVID, so we had fewer people. But it was still sold out, and we had the usual kind of what we expect, which is normally about 10% of people will make it the whole way through the day and survive and complete the final challenges, and that was right. So we took 30 people at the event, and 3 people survived. So 2 guys and 1 girl, and phenomenal job by them. They did incredibly well. It is really, really tough. So it's a really fun event. It takes no prisoners whatsoever, but again, people love it, and I think that's very important, to provide that challenge to people, and to provide people a way to experience real adversity, but in a way that is safe and manageable, and they can step back if they want to, but the adversity is there if they want to embrace it. And I think that is hugely important, especially in the rising sort of safetyist culture that the world has. At the moment, I think that is massively important to keep that alive.
And would you say that throughout your coaching career that you've generally taught kind of older people, as in adults, or have you done much teaching with children? What's the sort of split there?
Man, I've done it all. So I've been teaching disciplines, general martial arts, academics, parkour, survival skills, fitness, whatever, for 30 years. So and parkour for 15 years. So, and in the early days of parkour teaching, we were doing 90% of the teaching, probably worldwide. Parkour Generations was traveling all around the world, teaching all the time. We taught in the schools, we taught adults, we taught soldiers, Olympic athletes, parkour communities, everyone. So and the original teaching in the schools in the UK was all done by me and Forrest. So for several years, we were teaching all the schools in London that wanted to join the program. So I did a lot of teaching kids and a lot of teaching everyone. And I think it's important to teach lots of different demographics to help you become a great coach. I think you should work with different demographics because it will point out your failings and your weaknesses. Obviously, you'll have a bias. Everyone does. Some people prefer teaching kids. Some of our coaching team now, they prefer teaching kids. Some of them prefer teaching the adults. That's totally normal. But I think a good coach should try and get experience of coaching every demographic, from elite athletes to couch potatoes to kids to adults to older people to whatever, because it highlights your own biases and your own weaknesses, and you learn a huge amount from different skills will be required to be developed to teach those different demographics. So I think it's very important to have a wide base. And I was lucky to because anyone that wanted to learn, we would teach them in the early years. So it doesn't matter whether they were a special forces soldier or a 6-year-old kid in a school. We had to find a way to teach them. So, and that experience was really useful, and especially in terms of developing coaching standards and qualifications and courses for all the different groups and sort of specialists, CPDs and things like that. That was very useful in coming to develop those.
And with teaching children, something that I find difficult, you mentioned providing challenge and providing adversity. And with children, obviously, they want to have fun and want to be challenged as well. How do you find the balance with that? How do you find a way of making things hard for them, but not putting them off and not, making sure that they enjoy the classes?
Actually, it's probably easier with kids because kids naturally like to be challenged, right? When kids play, they seek challenge in play. They don't do stuff that is not challenging when they play. Kids seek challenges in play, physical or mental or whatever, or technical, cerebral, psychological, whatever. They seek challenge because play is, all animals are, certainly all mammals anyway, are designed to, their play is a form of them developing the skills they're going to need in their older life. So play is not just for fun, play is very serious. And that only works if play, therefore, is challenging, because that forces you to stretch your abilities. So, lion cubs will hunt each other and fight and stalk each other. And they're developing the skills they need as adult lions. So it's playful, but, they're really scrapping. They're having a go at each other. They're trying to win, trying to hunt each other down. So, and kids, it's the same when they play. They make their play very challenging, especially if you leave them alone for unsupervised play, which is the best form of play for kids. And parkour naturally challenges you. If you just ask, a kid to get from here to there without touching the ground, they will love that. It'll be tough, but they would do that anyway without an adult telling them to. So if you just give them that framework within which to, and you offer them this activity within a framework that's a little bit more structured maybe, and gives them some guidance as to how to do it better, they will naturally go for it. So when we teach kids, we use what is called constraints-led method of motor skill acquisition, really, if you want to get technical about it. Constraints-led practice effectively just means that rather than prescribing the movements, so saying you have to do 50 push-ups or this running jump like this or this type of acrobatic movement, rather than saying that, we would just limit the challenge by constraints. So we need you to get from here to here without touching the ground is the prime example, right? The constraint it's an environmental constraint. The constraint is you can't touch the ground. And that's it. You do anything else you want. It's up to you how you move. That has been proven not only to be incredibly appealing to kids, because they like the freedom within that and the autonomy, but it also develops their lateral thinking, their problem solving skills. It also has been proven to increase skill acquisition by about 5 times in terms of speed if you use constraints-led motor skills, rather than trying to prescribe a movement and get a kid to do exactly this biomechanical movement. That's very hard for humans to do in some ways, and they will learn a skill quicker if you just give them constraints and ask their brain, their nervous system, to work out the most efficient way to do it. About 5 times as fast, most of the scientific studies show. So with kids, we use constraints-led practice, and it's automatically challenging. It automatically self-scales, and they enjoy it. They love it. So it's easier to challenge kids once you understand how kids learn. The only other thing you've got to think about really with kids is that you may not have to think about as much with adults, although you still do. But is the meaning of the challenge, the meaning of the training. So kids only like to do things that they invest their own meaning in. If it has no meaning to a child, it'd be very hard to get them to do it, right? So because they just don't understand why they should do it unless there's real meaning for them. So whereas an adult, they can create meaning. They can go to the gym and work out hard because they can go, all right, I may not want to do this, but I understand if I do it, I'll lose weight, or I'll do this or that or whatever. So they build in a meaning, and they can learn and acquire a meaning in that way. But kids, for them, it's just about what connects to their inner meaning. So you have to think, what is meaningful to this kid, and use that as the tool to shape their training around. So, for example, if a kid loves Spider-Man, Spider-Man is hugely meaningful to that kid. For us, it's just Spider-Man, it's a superhero character. For that kid, that Spider-Man might be everything to that kid. They have posters on their walls, costumes, they watch all the movies. It's hugely meaningful. So if you tie Spider-Man into their training, they're there all day, every day, training as hard as you like. Because now it's got meaning to them. They're learning to be Spider-Man. So it's very much with kids. You've got to have that. I think those are the 2 key things: constraints-led method and find the meaning. And then you probably will have a really good path for them to develop until they become adults, and then they will naturally sort of create their own meaning, and then they will want to focus their training in specific ways and specialize a bit more and whatever.
And could you give a few examples of this constraints learning for people listening? I get the one about not touching the floor and stuff, but I think that one thing that I find with teaching children is that you're having to I find myself having to be creative quite constantly to try and think of different ways of helping them and teaching them and adapting to their kind of different needs and things. And so could you give some other examples of like these constraints?
Yeah, sure. So constraints-led training, constraints-led practice, they're typically, the constraints fall under sort of 3 categories, which is kind of an environmental constraints, individual constraints, and task constraints. So, for example, you can put everything into those 3 categories pretty much, and you can use combinations of those categories to create a challenge or a task or an activity, or a game, whatever. So, if you think about it, all games are just constraints-led practices, right? All games or sports, they're just, you've got to do this, you've got to get the ball here, and these are the constraints. You can only use your feet, for example, in football. That would be, so football has various constraints, right? It has an environmental constraint, the pitch, and the goals and the offside rules. It has individual constraints, you can only use your feet or your head, and it has task constraints. Every time you get the ball in the goal, it's a point. So those are the constraints of football, basically. Then there's a few extra rules, but those are the rough constraints of a football match. And then you play, and people work out the best way to do that and to solve that problem. So, the environmental constraint that everyone uses in parkour is kind of don't touch the ground. The task constraint could be you have to don't touch the ground, plus you have to get these items there as well. So you have to get these 10 hacky sacks over there, or these 3 medicine balls there, or you have to carry your friend there, or whatever, And the individual constraint could be you have to do it blindfolded, or you have to do it with your left hand behind your back, or something like that. So a combination of those constraints allows you to create interesting, diverse challenges that you can constantly scale. But that's a really interesting way to work with kids, because they, at the end of the day, they like games. All humans like games, but kids especially. And if they see there's a game with a clear task, and this is what they've got to do to achieve it, they get this from here to there or whatever, they will go for that. They'll enjoy it, and they'll want to do it longer than you want to do it as the coach. You'll sort of be like, okay, we've got to stop now. They'll be like, no, I want to continue. So which is what you want. So that's play-based training, right? Which is especially useful for sort of 6, 7, 8-year-olds, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds. When they get a bit older, they can start moving into sort of more adventure-based training and then more kind of actual training. So at some stage, play does become training for human beings, and it should, because if you want to really master a skill, you must then begin to focus and do what's known as deliberate practice, right? Which is something we talk about in level 2 a lot, which is the idea of how experts become expert at what they do, and what sets aside an expert from a non-expert in terms of their learning methodology. And it really comes down to this notion of deliberate practice. So at some stage, you have to transition to that. So you can't just play your entire life, sort of thing, if you want to become really, really expert at something. But you must continue to play as well. But you can't only play, sort of thing, as an adult.
I remember doing my level 1 with you back in, I think it's 2014 now. I remember something you said about saying that this parkour session for a child could be the highlight of their week. And I remember that stuck with me because I didn't have a kind of natural inclination towards coaching. It was something that I thought, well, it'd be good to get qualified because I don't really know what I want to do with my life. I don't know what path I want to take. I do love parkour, more than anything, and I want to stay in this world of parkour. So maybe coaching would be something to try. And now, it's become my kind of full-time work, and it's something that I, love doing. But I think that point did stick with me because that is definitely a motivator for coaching. I feel like there are a lot of parkour people who really struggle with coaching and don't really see any. They see it kind of as a process rather than like an actual helpful thing. So just personally, things like that, but that way of thinking has definitely helped kind of switch on that motivation. And I see it. I see, especially this year with lockdown and things, and this quite subtle change in how the kids have been, from the start of the year to now, and how all this time not being able to play, not being able to challenge themselves has affected them. And it's kind of interesting and quite in some ways quite concerning to see. So for me, that adds another layer of motivation. That I am in this role. They are here with me for an hour. How can I do the absolute best that I can with these people?
Yeah. That's great that you've taken it that far and gone on and now do a great job of helping so many people, because coaching is a big responsibility because of that, because if you get it right, you can have a huge positive impact, and if you get it wrong, you can have a negative impact. So our first rule of coaching is primum non nocere, right? And that Latin phrase, which is actually the first rule of the medicinal world, which is do no harm. So our first rule is don't harm the people that you're coaching in any way, right? Because then at least if you don't make them better, at least you're not making them worse.
Absolutely.
So first rule is do no harm, and then find a way to positively impact their lives. But I think it's a really important thing for coaches to bear in mind that they do have that impact. You don't see it a lot of the time because you run your class and then your students go away. Your kids and adults go away and you don't see them until another class. And in the class, they may be a certain way, they may be on a certain facade. But you may not know, you're not with them the rest of the week. So you don't know what they're thinking the rest of the week. But the rest of the week, they may be remembering how awesome that class was. That may be really inspirational to them. And they may be incredibly looking forward to the next class with you. So, you may be a big presence in their life, just touching their lives once a week. You may be a huge presence in their life, a huge positive presence. So it's very, very important for coaches to remember that, because that's as you say, it's very motivational for us, and helps keep the energy alive. As to why you do it, you've got to have meaning as to why you're doing this, why are you coaching. It's something we ask early on in level 1. It's like, why are you here? Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to coach? I don't like the word workforce, for example. People use this word in coaching a lot in the UK. They say, the workforce. this is just wrong, man, isn't it? You shouldn't see coaching as work. You know, coaching is that word workforce. For me, it really demeans the population of coaches. Coaching is a vocation. It's a calling, and it should be something that it's a mentorship. It's you know, you're a role model to people. It's not about just creating a workforce that can tick boxes and you know, fill classes. It's not at all. It's about helping people become inspirational individuals that can have a positive impact on other people's lives, and do it as a vocation, you know, not as a job. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind, because a lot of the other sports, in my experience, and when we came to create the coaching qualifications in the UK, we looked at a lot of the sport qualifications in the UK, and it was clear that they'd lost that, a lot of them, that it had become just a piece of paper you had to get, and it was just a job. You know, they weren't expecting people to be role models. They weren't inspiring them in that way, and there was no barrier to entry, so anyone could become qualified to be a sports coach in any sport without demonstrating any competence in the sport. That is the way it is in the UK. Apart from in parkour, because of the rules we set in place against huge opposition from Sport England and that at the time. Because to us it was very clear that no, if you want to take on the responsibility, if you want to earn the responsibility and the right to teach someone and have that authority, you should demonstrate that you really want it. You should earn it, earn the right. And if you're not willing to do that work to earn the right, then you shouldn't be teaching people. For me, it's pretty simple. Maybe I'm old school that way, but you know, I think it's a very because it's been my profession for so long, and I've seen the impact it can have around the world, positively and negatively. I think it should be something that people consider very seriously. So it's good what you did. You know, you went into it and you weren't sure, but you thought, you know, I'll try it out and have a look at the qualifications and see what I learn about it. And as you went through the process, you then were like, actually, yes, this is something I really, really want to do. And you know, you didn't just walk into it and be like, oh yeah, I'll just do that for fun. You know, you actually thought about it, and then you ended up doing it. So you thought carefully about it, and that's probably what makes you a good coach, because you're serious about it. There's nothing worse than those people that turn up to coach, but they don't really want to be there, and they're just collecting a paycheck. You know, those people should quit. They should quit and go to something else immediately, because they don't want to be there. So don't be there.
Yeah. It's something that I touched on with Posey Brown, who I had on previous.
Posey's awesome.
Yeah, had a really cool chat with her, and one thing that I'm not sure whether I actually said this because I was, you know, just listening to her mostly, but she did mention about this idea of imposter syndrome as a coach, and she's in the genesis of her coaching life, whereas I've been coaching for a while, but it's something that I do battle with. I do have this constant feeling that I'm not a good coach, and that I shouldn't be here, or I shouldn't be in this position of responsibility. But in a way, I think it's good and bad, because it constantly forces me to think, well, how can I make that session better? How can I interact with this individual better, who has this certain, I don't know, this certain need or this certain behaviour, and it is something that I wrestle with, but I think that just comes down to a sense of self-confidence. And personally, I'm not as loud as someone like Forrest. You know, I'm not that type of personality, and so trying to develop this coaching persona has been a really interesting challenge for me, just as a person, but
that's good, right? So,
that's what I mean. It's also good. Yeah, it's
super good. It's super good. Don't think it's a bad thing, man. You know, I've been coaching for 30 years, and I still now, after a class, I would still think, that was shit. I need to do this better. I need to do that better. I can't believe I forgot that. You know, and that's 30 years. So, you know, if you're not doing that, then you are probably not as good a coach as you could be, and you are probably getting worse as a coach. The minute you stop questioning yourself, you know, this is incredibly important, and it probably means you're a good coach, and it's what means Posey is going to be good as well. We just had her assist at our women's introduction course, 6-week course, and she really enjoyed it, and she did great. But she was really, you know, sort of in some ways nervous about doing that, I suppose, at the beginning, but by the end of it, I think she's developed a lot more confidence, and that's what will make her a good coach, is because she questions it. It's something that one of the events that I talk at occasionally around the world is called the Hero Roundtable, about this concept of heroism, and one of the way I think of it is this idea of the hero's doubt. So heroic characters, or good people, or people that are diligent and want to become better, they will always have a level of doubt about what they're doing. They will always question what they do. And they're not sure about it. They're not 100% sure that what they're doing is the right thing. They think it's the right thing on balance, but they're not 100% sure. And heroes always have that doubt. I think good people always have the doubt. When you don't have any doubt, now it's very dangerous, because now you're an absolutist. And that's where you get the fanatics in life, and the people that cause real problems, the people that are 100% sure they are right. Right, this has caused all the problems in the history of the world. I mean, yeah. And this is a huge issue. So anyone that questions themselves in their profession, in their art form, in their life, in their vocation, whatever, they are doing the right thing. Then yes, it is a question of, as you say, it's a question of balance with self-confidence. You can't let that question become too much that it destroys your confidence, but you should let that questioning reinforce your confidence, because you should answer the question, and then say, yes, I'm still happy that I'm doing the right thing for now. But then you should come back to that question every now and again, and think, is this still right? Is this the best way to do this? Has science changed? Am I out of date now? And update. So the constant questioning is incredibly important. So it's a good thing. That's totally a good thing.
And I hope that for other coaches listening, that this isn't... I definitely feel a sense of this is kind of keeping up with the relevant kind of correct information, the correct scientific information, the correct ways of teaching, the different technicalities. And I hope for coaches listening that this doesn't form a barrier in reaching out to other coaches and trying to learn from each other, because there's lots of different ways to coach and different ways to learn, and I think that sometimes there can be this barrier of, well, I don't really know the absolute up-to-date science of everything, so therefore I'm not really going to show off my coaching, really, because I'm worried about criticism. I'm worried about people thinking that I'm not up to scratch, really. And so I find that whole thing interesting, but it's something that we should talk about, something that coaches should have a constructive conversation about, because you should, if you are 100% thinking that what you do is correct, then I think you are in trouble there, and it will affect the people.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Again, the growth mindset is everything, right? So you've got to have a growth mindset, which means having an open feedback loop internally. And what that means is you are constantly looking for mistakes that you are making. So you're constantly looking for ways you could improve. That is the growth mindset. You're looking to get better the whole time, and then you try and find a way to get better, and then you do that, and then you continue the process again. So the fixed mindset is where you stop that and you think, I'm doing it as well as I could do. Now I'm not going to learn anything more. And that's when you start getting worse. So growth mindset and the open feedback loop internally is just incredibly important in everything in life. It's probably the most important thing you can have as an individual, is to have that learning mindset. And in coaching, that means studying the latest science. It's a good thing to do, but also understanding that the old methods are there for a reason. There's this, so Nassim Taleb, in his book Anti-Fragility and the Black Swan, and these books, which are really good, really interesting books to read as a coach. They're nothing to do with coaching, but that idea of one of his ideas is if something has lasted 1,000 years in human history, he has 1,000 years as his sort of arbitrary marker. If it's been around 1,000 years or more, and it hasn't gone, and it's still widespread, technology-wise, as a technology or as a product of some sort, it's probably good. It probably works, and it probably serves a purpose. Otherwise, we probably would have got rid of it, because humanity as a species is anti-fragile, which means it's constantly looking to improve anyway. So it will throw it out if it doesn't work. So, but it takes time for that to happen. So you can't immediately assume that the latest science is the best, because 20 years from now, that science now might be thrown out, right? 60 years ago, smoking was considered good for your health. So, and a lot of the science said, yeah, this is good for you, because they were trying to sell a product. So if you trusted that science, you now look like an idiot. So you need to kind of think sort of long term in some ways, and think these old methods have been around for a long time and they work, and there's a reason they do them. So whether modern science backs them up or not, it's something to think about. Don't just say I'm only going to follow modern science. A good example of that is parkour. So when we began parkour training and coaching, when we began studying parkour, we had Roehampton University and Birmingham University, and all these universities started to study parkour. The first sort of physical tests that were done on parkour that I'm aware of were back in 2006, and that was with a load of our athletes with Roehampton University. They test the Olympic athletes in the UK, and they wanted to test, like, what does parkour do to high level practitioners? What does it do to your balance, to your mobility, your impact absorption, all this sort of stuff. And they were blown away by the results of the test. I won't bore you with the results, but they were blown away by the results. But the interesting thing was that a lot of the time as we were going through those tests, they were saying this shouldn't be possible according to our current sports science. So they were looking at impact from height, for example. They were saying you shouldn't be able to absorb these impacts safely without injury. We were like, why not? Because we do it every day. And they said, no, according to biomechanics and sports science, a height from this drop is going to cause this. If you do that this many times, it's going to cause this much damage. So that sports science was wrong, right? So if we'd have listened to the sports science, we would have not created, parkour would not have been built. The founders in France would not have created parkour because sports science said it's not possible at the time. But it clearly is possible. And now sports science has updated itself and been like, oh shit, okay, so maybe humans can take drops on this impact from these heights as long as they work with these methods and these techniques and land like this and this biomechanics, etc., and have this much training. So, the sports science at the beginning of parkour did not support parkour, but now sports science is changing and adapting because of parkour, as a small example. So, in some ways, and so I think that sort of thing that was very obvious to me early on. Because I am an academic, so I have a very scientific mind. And when these scientists were telling me these things are not possible, I was like, well, clearly they're possible, because here's empirical proof. These guys have been doing it 10, 15 years. They don't have any injuries, and they take enormous, ridiculous drops onto concrete. So that's empirical proof that it is possible. So we need to revise that and look at that. So I think that idea is very interesting one, and that's why, as you say, coaches shouldn't be built off just because they don't have the latest science. Sometimes the old methods work really, really, really well. Look at the Shaolin monks in China. Their methods have remained unchanged for a long time, right? Hundreds and hundreds of years, same methods, and they produce phenomenal athletes all the time. And their methods are not, by any means, are not in line with Western sports science. But they work, they clearly work. And they produce great athletes, incredibly strong, incredibly flexible. They're horribly hard training methods, but they produce phenomenal athletes. So we've had direct contact with them to see that in action, and you come away going, okay, those methods may be lambasted in the modern sports coach environment, but they clearly produce amazing results. So don't throw the old stuff out. I think is a really good approach, and then of course do also engage with modern science and look to improve that where you can, which hopefully is what we do. We try and get a balance between the two.
And what do you think of parkour practitioners who have maybe never been coached before, who are at the very kind of highest level in terms of maybe you say skill, technical skill? People, like Tim Champion, Dal Stingley, these kind of, athletes. I think athlete has become a more common term in the parkour world. What's your view of these people? People like Storror and these high level practitioners. What's your view of how they've developed over the years and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. That parkour's always been that way, right? So the original athletes in parkour were that way. David and the Yamak and Stefan and Thomas Desbois and Johan Vegru and all these guys and when I joined us, we weren't taught. We had no coaches. I didn't learn parkour because I was coached in parkour. So not formally anyway. you can, it depends how you define coaching, right? You can look at those people and say, the original people, for example, and these later variations of them, you can say, well, they are being coached. They're coaching each other. They're doing what's called peer coaching. So they're working in groups of coactive coaching where they're helping each other get better, which is the sort of basic primary training model originally of parkour, was a group of people going out and challenging each other and learning from each other and being inspired and motivated from each other and watching each other and modeling each other, right? This is how parkour grew. So there is coaching going on. Storror, all those guys, they didn't learn parkour in a vacuum, right? They would never have learned it had they not watched the videos of the people before them and modelled them. That is a form of coaching. It's a very basic form of learning through feedback, through visual feedback, right? So human beings can only learn through one way. There's feedback, that's it. That's the only way you can learn anything, is through a feedback loop. You see something, or you try something, or you read something, then you take something in, then you try it, you get a result from that attempt, and that result is either as you want it or not as you want it, and you then take that, you analyse that result, and you put it back into another attempt, right? That's it. That's the feedback loop. That's the only way you could learn. It's just basic physics, really. So anyone who has learned has done that. The question is your feedback loop optimised for safety and for quick growth and whatever you want it to achieve. So what a coach does is they will try to optimize someone's learning and someone's feedback loop. So that doesn't mean you can't learn something without a formal coach. Absolutely, of course you can. You become awesome at something without a formal coach. Because we've got so much, especially now, you've got access to so much information online, YouTube, articles, whatever, you can see all this stuff, see these videos of all these practitioners. So that's great. I mean, that's exactly it. It doesn't necessarily mean that those practitioners wouldn't be even better if they then had a coach to work with them, who would then make them even better by pointing out the slight weaknesses and biases in their movement. Well, you can see that when you watch anyone move, you can see the weaknesses and the biases and the strengths. So, and the long-term effects of their training, which is also something you have to consider. It's very, in parkour, perhaps one of the early issues was, and still maybe an issue, is that particularly young men, because they are very strong and have good power to weight ratios, if they have developed a good coordination over their upbringing, they can take to parkour pretty quickly. They're light and they're strong, so they can start doing big jumps and impressive stuff, and they can learn their movements and coordinations and things. But what they're not perhaps thinking is the longevity of this. Like, if I keep training like this, when I'm 60, 70 years old, what will the results be in my body? And do I want those results or not? Most of them don't think about that at that stage. None of us really did in the early days. So, what are the results of this training long term? And now, having trained in parkour for almost 20 years and having taught it for 15 years, I can see now that there are many, 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 for the few that became those great athletes that are well known, who have made it and have stayed resilient. There are multiple iterations of them who tried the same path, who didn't end up that way, who ended up very injured with damaged knees, damaged backs, had to stop, right? So you can't base, you shouldn't base a rule on the exceptions, right? So just because you see a few people doing, they may be an exception. For every one team champion, there may be 10,000 people that tried to be team champion but ended up too injured to carry on with parkour. You never see them though, because YouTube doesn't show them. So you've got to be careful of that bias in a way. And what I think a good coach will do is make parkour accessible to anyone, right? So those people are perhaps people who are autodidacts in some way. So they're people that can learn by themselves, right? They want to do something, they're passionate about it, they just get into it, they find the information, they go and do it, like we were at the start of parkour. But those people may not be the most common type of learner in the world. Autodidacts might be quite rare. They are. So the majority of people may need someone to help them understand that they can do these things and start to learn these things and develop the confidence physically and psychologically to do these things. They may need a coach as a way in, right? So those athletes are great, and let's hope they all continue developing and evolving, because they push the limits of human capability, and they keep that wild nature of parkour alive and visible. That's awesome. We need that. Definitely need that. It's been there from the start. David, Yamak, Stefan, that has to stay. But what we tried to do when we created the coaching idea in parkour was suppose early on, myself and Forrest, we knew, we had a discussion about it really early on, like 2004, that if we don't create a way to teach and a way for people to learn in an accessible way, parkour will either die or it will become very, very, very niche. Because back then it was incredibly exclusive and inaccessible when I started, right? If you weren't young, fit, strong male who had access to people that were doing it, you had to be confident, you had to be happy with risk, all that sort of stuff. If you weren't that type of person, you would never get into parkour. It was incredibly exclusive. And that is not a great thing, because we knew that parkour has so many benefits, but it's only going to be experienced by this tiny demographic of people. Whereas if we find a way to make it accessible, you can have older people learn it, or people with a physical disability, or people who aren't so confident, or non-athletes, people who have got to their 40s and have never done any training. They can experience it. Kids, really young kids. So we wanted to broaden the accessibility with coaching, and that was the point of the ADAPT qualification, really, actually, was to create a way to take these practitioners and say, how are you going to pass it on to the next generation? Rather than just be awesome yourself, how are you going to pass it on, and how are you going to help more people get the benefits that you got? And people that aren't like you, how are you going to help them learn it? Because not everyone's like you. So you may have learned it this way, but you may be in the 0.001% of the population. How are you going to help the other 99% of the population? And that means learning to coach, right, which is a separate skill. So that was kind of why we created ADAPT, really, was to help the essence of parkour survive us and survive the sort of the first couple of generations of practitioners who weren't actually, most of them weren't really that interested in teaching, because they were doing parkour because they loved it. They weren't really interested in passing it on, which is totally understandable.
Mm. And what do you think success looks like in parkour?
I think that it's a very interesting question. What does success look like in life, in general, in anything? The word success is a very loaded word, I think. Very loaded, right? So I think most people you'll probably end up, if you go down that rabbit hole, you'll probably end up equating success with achievement of your purpose, right? Most people end up somewhere along that line. Like, if you are fulfilling something that is meaningful to you, and you're doing something that is purposeful to you, and you're finding that you're able to continue do it and finding growth in that thing, probably you are leading a successful life, right? It's not. I think success is, and I think it's pretty much proven to have nothing to do with the acquisition of wealth or materials or products or status. I think these are nothing to do with success, right? They're totally unrelated. I think a successful life is a life that has meaning to the person. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a happy life either. I don't think happiness is a meaningful word at all in many ways, because happiness, I think, ensues as a product of purpose. Most of the time, it's clear, and a lot of the psychological studies around this will back this up, that people that have purpose in life are much more likely to then also answer the question, are you happy, with a yes. So the two are clearly correlated, feeling that you have some sort of meaning and purpose. It doesn't matter what that purpose is, whether it's bringing about world peace or cleaning your street. It doesn't matter. What matters is, are you fulfilling that purpose? That person will then feel they have a meaningful and successful life. So, therefore, parkour would be just the same. I would say if your training has meaning to you, your practice has meaning to you, and fulfills some purpose that you wanted to fulfill, then you are successful in parkour. Then that's success for you. And the minute that stops, you're no longer successful. So success can come and go, right, in that way.
And what about that in terms of your own parkour practice journey? How do you train these days? How do you find that meaning in your training?
Well, for me, my life has always involved training. I started training in fighting arts and oddly in dance and stuff like that when I was about 7, 8 years old. So I kind of and I got into martial arts particularly pretty intensively when I was about 8, 9 years old. It became kind of really important to me. So I understood the nature of training then, and discipline and the benefits of that. And so once you've done that for a certain amount of time, it becomes part of who you are. It becomes like, the cliche is the way, right? You understand that this is the way, sort of thing. That there are benefits to continuing training, and that training content can change, methodologies can change, but the path of training, you begin to realize that it's incredibly important as an anchor point in your life, psychologically, and for your mental health, and not only your physical health, but your mental health, and your sense of continuity, your sense of stability, all these sort of things. You realize that it is massively important to stay on the path. What you do in terms of your training, I'm not sure that matters so much. That will change and evolve, and my training has changed and evolved over the years. I still obviously train parkour, and within that I include a lot of different elements of physical training. I still train in the fighting arts, but my training in parkour certainly has evolved, because I've learned certain things from certain periods of training, and then you move away from them. So I was discussing recently with Stefan Vigru that, back in the day, we used to do huge amounts of endurance-based challenges, especially QM. We would call for miles and miles and miles. And I don't do that so much now. Neither does Steph. We don't do it so much now. Now, if we need to, we can. Like, there's a rendezvous event a couple of years ago where we had to do. The last challenge was a backwards QM up Wembley Park steps, which was big steps, and it was like an hour of non-stop backwards QM up this thing. It was, for most people, it was harsh. But I halfway through it, I asked Steph, how's this feel? Is this tough for you? And he was like, nah. and I said, but you don't train QM anymore, really, do you? And he was like, not really, but not so much to this degree. But he said, I did so much of it that my body can just turn it on if I need to, and I can just call for hours and hours and hours. But he doesn't do it that much anymore. But the point is, and Blaine will say the same thing, we learned what we needed to learn from that phase of extreme endurance practice. Once you've done it and you can do it for that amount of years or whatever, and your body can rise up to those challenges, and psychologically, more importantly, you can rise up to those challenges. Once you've done that, you can kind of ease off on that a bit, because you kind of know you could do it if you need to. So now I'm more interested in, okay, what are the other things that I haven't mastered or haven't got good at yet, and I'm going to try and get good at these things. It's not to say that stuff doesn't come up every and again. We'll still have peak experiences where we do ridiculous muscle up challenges or whatever, but they're not as common, and that's because we've learned what we needed to from those things. So the content can change, but I think staying on the path in some way is, I feel that is incredibly important, and I like trying new things as well. So I like learning new skills, and things that even aren't maybe related so much to parkour. Although when you understand one discipline well, you understand that all things are sort of related. So knife throwing, for example, may not seem like it's related to parkour, but actually you get into it and you're like, there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of crossover. So I think your practice, your movement practice, everyone's movement practice is a individual practice. Or that what they are doing is they're embodying, in some way they're embodying themselves through their practice, right? So they're expressing themselves through their physical practice, and it's up to them to refine and define that as they want, and to push that as hard as they want, depending on what questions they want to answer, I suppose. So yeah, that's a long-winded, abstract, probably crap answer, but
no, it's interesting. So yeah, it seems just from the short history of parkour that the earlier methods of training did revolve around a lot of, as you say, kind of these peak experiences, these endurance challenges, and these highly physical feats, really. What do you think about? Because to me, it seems that I kind of have my one foot in the past in that way and one foot in the newer generation, and that's simply because of how old I am and when I got into the sport. I feel like I'm kind of a little bit in the middle. So, what do you think about how people move nowadays and how these? It seems to me that a lot of these kind of peak experiences are quite rare actually in parkour training. Parkour going out on the streets these days feels like challenge setting, with different kind of levels of specificity. I can't say that word.
Specificity.
Yes, yeah. And kind of just short, technical, precise movements. What do you think about this? Like, do you think that's okay? Do you think that's okay for people to go on and train like that? Do you think it's a shame that maybe they're not looking into some of these older, I say older, but not that old, these ways of thinking? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, each their own. I have no interest in what other people do. As a coach, obviously, I have an interest in what people do who I'm helping to learn. But beyond that, I have zero interest in what anyone else does in the world. I can care less what people do. So what matters is, in any discipline, who cares? What matters is what do you learn from your experience? What do you learn from your training? What gems are you uncovering? What self-knowledge are you acquiring? This is all that matters, I think. Whether you do a 15-foot, lache gainer, or you QM for a mile, who cares what you do? I can care less. What matters is, what do you learn from that process as a person? If you learn the things that help you improve as a person, and they give you meaning, and they achieve your purpose, and they reveal deeper levels of understanding of yourself to you, great, do it. I mean, I would never say otherwise, and never have. So, and I probably most of the old practitioners are probably the same, in that they're kind of like, we don't really care, because they're interested in their own development in that way. I think, and it's also not old and new. It's just cyclical, right? It's not a question of old and new. So it's just cyclical. So everything comes and goes in cycles. So a new discipline will be found, a new idea will come about, that will drive people in a certain way to understand themselves in certain ways, and it will probably be very extreme at the start. And then over time, it will evolve and spread and dilute and be twisted and changed, and new ideas will come in and appropriated and used for other reasons. And that's great and fine. But the original idea, in some of that, the original idea may not be conveyed, but they may not be trying to convey the original idea. So I could see this because of my background academically, my background is a historian, my degrees. So in my study of the martial arts and things, I can see that these things come in waves. So originally in karate, for example, the training was very, very, very hard, very rigid, very hugely elitist, and designed to fight, to make you a better fighter. That's it. Right. Then over time, decades, centuries, for various reasons, Japanese history, etc., it evolved and became a more civilian art and a more peaceful art, and now it's used for competitions and sports and showing off and whatever, different things, right? But I think it's important that the original essence of that thing is conveyed in some way so that people can still learn it if they want to. Maybe they don't want it, but the people that do want to learn it can still learn from it. But what will happen is a new discipline will arise that will convey those things. So when parkour came about, the concepts in parkour are not new, right? The ideas of that, pushing yourself and training yourself as hard as you can, mentally and physically, they're not new. They've been around in human history for thousands of years. Parkour was just a new expression of those things. And that will then go through a life cycle of changing and evolving and codifying and becoming more rigid in certain ways, and tournaments, etc. You can compare it to gymnastics as a prime example. If you look at gymnastics 100 years ago, it was parkour. If you go back and look at the original photos of gymnastics in the 20s, 30s, the gymnasia, outdoor training sessions that were climbing ropes, climbing poles, swinging on bars, vaulting boxes, it's parkour, 100%, right? Then what happened is competition was introduced that codified that and standardized that. And in that standardization, it reduced it. There's reduction in that. So it reduced it to you must move in this way, you must land in this way, because this is what gets you points. So now gymnastics is incredibly codified and incredibly standardized and incredibly non-adaptive movement discipline, right? It didn't begin like that. Parkour, 100 years ago, was parkour. So parkour will be the same. And it's happening quicker in parkour because of social media and the internet. But say 20, 30 years from now, it'll be in the Olympics, blah, blah, blah. The majority of parkour, probably worldwide, unfortunately, will probably be, unfortunately from my perspective, will probably be a codified version that people learn in order to succeed in tournaments, right? So it will have lost its adaptive nature. It'll go down the same path as gymnastics. And I don't mind that because that's the human nature. But me personally, I'm not interested in that. I'm only interested in the essence that the original training can bring you, that all these perennial disciplines have as they come through the generations. Because I think that is a really useful, valuable thing. And I think the original methods of training in parkour were designed to do that. They weren't designed to make you able to do crazy, amazing backflips to rails. They weren't designed to do that. Parkour was not built to do that. It was originally designed to help you surpass yourself and understand adversity and find a way through it and become a functional version of yourself. But really, self-knowledge was the idea. So for me, that's the most valuable thing within it, because that's lifelong, that self-knowledge. Learning to, do a funky movement, it's not lifelong. You're going to lose the ability to do that at some stage. But the self-knowledge you gain from the disciplined elements of training in parkour and the facing your fear and the breaking jumps idea and those peak challenges, that self-knowledge is absolutely invaluable. For me, that's been the most meaningful thing. It doesn't matter to me now whether I lose my ability to do a round off back tuck. I couldn't care less. What matters is the stuff I've learned from the hard training I went through that has changed me as a person and will carry through to the end of my life. So when I coach, I try to help people. I try to convey this idea in some way, not dogmatically, and I won't really talk about it, but I try to get them to touch on that idea, because I think that will have a more positive impact on their life than just becoming a phenomenal mover, which is also good, of course. But it's like a side effect for me. That's a bonus,
And I know that generally you don't really... I know you have social media accounts and things like that, but you're not really the type to use it in a lot of ways that's used now. People use social... people use Instagram, for example, has become the hub of parkour, really. And it seems like people are uploading things every day, different movements, different ideas, different challenges, these sort of things. Do you feel as a coach and a practitioner that this way of sharing knowledge, and sharing inspiration through virtual content, do you feel that's not something you focus on in terms of when you're coaching? That's where you focus your sharing of knowledge, your sharing of the kind of the ways of practice that you think embody parkour. Do you feel that's where... Do you understand what I mean? Do you feel like that's where you center because I feel like people are on the other side in a lot of different ways. People put all their effort into social media. People put all their effort into creating lines, creating new videos and new things, and sharing things that way. Would I be kind of on the right lines there?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I have no interest in filming my training and putting it online. I mean, I never have, because I grew up in an era where we didn't do that. We didn't have that. The idea of taking photos when I was a teenager or at university, the idea of taking a photo of yourself when I was at university, it's just bizarre. It was inane. We would never have thought of it. It was inane. Like, if you did it, you would have been laughed at. Like, what are you doing that for? Why are you taking a photo of yourself? Like, you would have just been thought, you probably would have been ostracized and thought it was very weird. Whereas now it's completely normal, right? So I have no interest in showing people my training, like videoing. So why would I do that? I don't care what people think of my training. I'm only interested in my training for myself. So I never film my training. Or not never, very, very occasionally. If someone else will film it or whatever, very occasionally we'll put something up, but it's normally to convey a point of some sort that I'll put something up. But no, I have no interest in filming my training or putting the thought into setting up a camera or carrying a camera or setting up a phone. Or I can care less. So that's generational. So obviously younger generations, the iGen, the generation that came about with the internet and or whatever, they grew up with that stuff. So that's their way of communicating, and their way of, in some ways, their way of finding and expressing their meaning. and feeling that they have value, which probably is very sad. And I think in the future we will probably look back at that as a big mistake. If you look into the effects of social media and what they've done for mental health and increasing depression and suicide and anxiety in teenagers and young girls, and there's a clear parallel in the data between the arrival of social media in 2012, pretty much, Instagram, Facebook, and this sort of stuff, and a massive increase that's never been seen before in human history in depression, anxiety, and suicide in children and teenagers. So that is clearly causative. There's not an accident. That is a causal relationship. So there is a danger, I think, to having all your meaning based on putting videos online and whether people do or do not like them, or do not follow you. I think this is very dangerous, because you're then taking your inner peace, your contentment, your self-worth, and basically putting it out to the world and saying, you decide how I feel about myself. So you've just sacrificed autonomy and the autotelic nature, which is the self-purposing nature. I think that's a massive problem. So in that way, I think I would say to people, there's nothing wrong with sharing stuff online in videos and put parkour in that. It's super cool. And that's how parkour evolved right from the early days, right? If you think about it, back in the day when you had to wait for a video to download, you probably aren't old enough, but back in the day, like 2002, 2003, when someone would stream a video or whatever, and it was incredibly slow for you to download and watch it from France, and then it would be a really grainy video of someone doing a really crap reverse vault, and you'd be like, "This is amazing!" and you'd go out and practice it. That parkour even then was spread through that visual medium and that communication of video. That was how it grew internationally. So it's awesome, and it should continue. And it inspires people all the time. It drives people. It gives people new ideas. Great. That communication tool is phenomenally powerful. It's just that it's also got a little bit out of hand in terms of, there's no understanding of how to manage it in terms of its psychological impact on human beings. The overuse of it, let's say, especially for young people. So I'd say, as long as you're wary of that, don't put all your value and meaning in it, but certainly use it to express to convey points or share knowledge or share content or share ideas or inspire people. That's awesome stuff. Great. Yeah, I just don't give a shit myself about doing that. But hopefully I do. I kind of help people in other ways or whatever. I'm more interested, because I'm old school, I guess. I'm more interested in one-to-one interactions and in-person interactions and in-person teaching and coaching and training. So I like training with people and just training with that person, not bothering about filming it or whatever. Just going out and training. That's what I'm interested in, and that's because that's what I grew up doing. So, but I have no problem with. Why not? That it's clearly driven the progress collectively of. If you look at there's a really good book called Rise of Superman. Have you read that by Stephen Cotter?
No, actually, no.
It's awesome. It's a book about flow state. And Jamie and Stephen, the guys that read that, are really cool dudes. Guys that wrote it are really cool dudes, and it's all about the enormous progress that has happened in informal lifestyle sports, let's say, like parkour. They mentioned parkour in there, skateboarding, wingsuiting, motocross. These sort of what are seen as adrenaline sports, misnamed as adrenaline sports. If you look at the progress human beings have made in those disciplines in 30 years, and you compare it to the progress we've made in other disciplines, such as athletics or running or traditional sports, the progress in those disciplines is just massively faster and bigger. You can't compare the two. So if you look at where parkour was 2002 and where it is now, right? What was considered high-level parkour in 2002? Other than a few extreme cases like David and Steph, maybe who the stuff they did back then is still considered hardcore now. But if you look at what the average kid does now, there are kids doing gainers at Manpower, right? 15-year-old kids, right? So this sort of thing.
Well, I think one.
Okay. but there are kids now that their entry route when they're 14 is learning a side flip to a railing, right? Back in 2005, that would have been considered impossible. Right, so the progress in parkour, the physical achievement in parkour generally in the population is exponential. It's massive, and it's just incredibly rapid. It's happened in a decade, right? Tiny amount of time. Whereas the progress in athletics disciplines and traditional sports is not. I hate to say it, but if you take the science out, like the better tracks and the better shoes and that, there's not a lot of progress. So that, and the reason is, these guys would say the reason is the coactive flow state that these sports engender. They create a flow state and they get everyone in that flow state, and they require flow. You need to be in flow to be able to do these sports, whereas you don't need to be in flow to practice football. But you do need to be in a flow state to do parkour. So it's a really interesting idea, and they basically say that flow state is where humans progress the most, which is 100% proven to be true. So the more you're in flow, the quicker you progress. And because these communities are in flow really, really all the time when they're practicing, because of the risk involved, which is a flow trigger, the progression is exponential compared to these other sports where you can just sort of practice it and there's no risk and it doesn't really matter if you get it right or wrong. Whereas in skateboarding, it really matters if you get it wrong.
So do you think that consequence relates to of entering a flow state then? Because I would say that
yeah,
why don't footballers enter flow states? Why don't the best footballers enter a zone where they are completely at one with the ball?
They do. So Michael Jordan absolutely 100% was entering flow states when he was playing his best basketball. He was 100% in the flow state. The point Steve and Jamie are making is that if you're playing those sports, you want to enter a flow state. Whereas if you're playing these sports, you need to be in a flow state. So the difference is the progression will be quicker in these ones because you have to be in flow from the start. And one of the flow triggers is risk. There's about 17 they've identified. And one of them is risk. It's not the only one, but it's definitely one of them. And it's a really shortcut way to get into a flow state, right? It's a shortcut way to cut out the prefrontal cortex in movement, let's say, and go straight to your movement brain. And a good example of that is if you trip and fall downstairs, your prefrontal cortex shuts off and your movement brain takes over to make sure you don't die, right? And it happens because it goes, oh my God, there's a massive immediate consequence hitting out of me not getting this right. And your body will do amazing things to get you out of that situation, right? So you suddenly come up with these amazing movement skills you never knew you could do. So what they're saying is these disciplines, they let's say they put people in flow state 80% of the time, whereas the traditional sports and that may put people in flow state 20% of the time. And that means you're going to get much more progress in these disciplines in a short time. So, and I think that is evidenced by parkour because the progress is huge. That coactive flow needs other people around you, driving you, that you learn from, you model, that you train together with, equal level of challenge, feeling the community, all this sort of stuff also comes into it. And so YouTube and videos and the video community around the world has been part of that because you can share your movement with people in the States and Australia and Africa, wherever, and they can share it with you and you can all feel like you're part of a community and you'll push each other. And so the community is much bigger. So the internet and that has allowed these disciplines to progress much quicker now as a result. It was pre-internet, which I remember because pre-YouTube rather, let's say, in parkour, because YouTube was 2005. Progress was very slow in parkour because you didn't really have many role models to learn from. You download a French video every now and again, or you could train with the 4 or 5 people who also wanted to do it, who were also in the same boat as you in your city. So, progress was slower. So there's some really great elements to YouTube and the spread of movement through the internet and all that. It's clearly massively accelerated our progress.
And where do you see parkour going, essentially? Do you think that we're on a good track with having, more and more coaches qualified by the day and around the world and spreading these ideas? And do you feel positive about the future of parkour?
It's an interesting question because, what do we mean by the future of parkour? I suspect, according to, if I base it on models of the past, so the way disciplines grow and evolve historically, what we will see is what has already happened is there will be a spread of the discipline of the ideas. There will be a dilution of those ideas. There will be innovation of them. There will be adaptation of them. And it will continue that way. And then there will be an element that codifies it for for formal practice in terms of tournaments and things like this, and the Olympics and all that sort of stuff. That will happen. There will be more and more teaching codification over the years. A lot of that will be not positive, probably, in that it will just end up sort of reducing it to the lowest common denominator in some ways, which is one of the dangers of teaching or creating formal educational establishments. So I think there are some dangers, but as with all disciplines, but the essence of the thing will always be conveyed by the people who are super passionate about it. So if you want to get into that and find that, you'll probably always be able to find it. Like if you go into the fighting arts and you want to understand, you really want to understand combatives, like really how to fight and how to cause damage and how to not have damage caused to you in a functional, practical, real world way. So you're not interested in sport or showing off or anything like that. You're only interested in combatives, which is fighting. If you want to learn that, you can learn it. But it's definitely a small subset of martial arts, right? So the majority of martial arts is sport-based or community-based or holistic practice-based or whatever, which is all great too. So, but if you really want to learn the original fighting art version, you can. So I guess I'm an example in that I was interested in, I'm only really interested in the practical fighting arts of martial arts. So, and when I was growing up, I was very fascinated by sort of swordsmanship and these kind of traditional, the old ways of using weapons and like that. So there's lots of swordsmanship practice around the world. There's modern fencing, there's kendo, there's all this sort of stuff. But they had no interest in me because they're sport variants. So they're the majority, but I had no interest in them because they're clearly sports. They're clearly not functional uses of the sword. So I had to go to Japan and live in Japan and train at one school that teaches the old, original way to use a sword in combat, which is the oldest martial art in Japan. So I had to go there and learn that. So I guess maybe I'm quite rare in that I was willing to go there and do that, but I could do it, if that stuff had been kept alive. So because I wanted it, I could go and do it. And I think the same will happen in parkour. There will be a lot of people that will be learning the sport variant or the competition variant or the showing off variant. But there'll be some that go, no, I want to really understand what parkour was about and I want to learn that. And they will seek out the people that still train like that and still teach that. So I think that will probably happen because that's happened in every discipline worldwide. But I think in terms of coaching, the parkour coaching community worldwide is incredibly strong and really good, really high level. And that's very interesting because I've seen coaching from all different ways. We're heavily involved in the fitness industry, and I present at many of their big conferences over the years, and other sports coaching qualifications. I've seen and watched them and whatever. And I can happily tell you that the parkour coaching community worldwide are really, really high level compared to many of those sports and fitness coaching worlds. The standards are super high, and we take a small amount of credit for that because I'm aware that ADAPT set very high standards early on, and most of the communities around the world originally did that and took that on, and they embodied that and passed those qualifications, and they then maintained those standards. So the standards are very, very high for parkour coaching worldwide. The parkour coaching communities take coaching very seriously, and that is super cool. And we see that from, if we run an ADAPT level 1 and we have sports coaches come from other sports, they may have been coaching in another sport for 20 years. They will come to our qualification and they will sit there and go, at the end, they will, in almost 100%, they will say, wow, this is really in-depth coaching science and knowledge. I've never studied this stuff. I've never looked at it. I've never thought about it. And for us, it's like, you've been coaching 10 years, 20 years, how have you not, this is what we consider level 1 stuff, how have you not studied this? It's actually not common stuff for coaching communities to study worldwide. So the parkour communities all around the world, a lot of them have very high coaching level, and that gives me a lot of hope for the fact that parkour will continue to be coached really well, for the next generations, as long as those standards remain high. There is already evidence of those standards being diluted, and coaching ideas coming out that are happy to dilute those standards in order to get more people through the qualifications for either financial purposes or purposes of sort of building up the recognition of the discipline amongst other things. So we've got this many coaches, and to do that they're diluting, and that's a shame, but it's also inevitable. It doesn't surprise me because it's what happened to all the other sports qualifications. So it's inevitable, but it's a shame that it's happened so quickly, I would say. And the only qualification that I can have any say in, of course, is ADAPT, and ADAPT will never do that. So ADAPT will never dilute its standards, because I think there should always be a place for people to go to really be tested on their coaching and really prove that they are really good and get great education, high level education, and raise themselves up to that standard. And all the coaches that go into that qualification, they are typically people who want that. They really want to get good at coaching, and they're very serious about that sort of level of knowledge. So I hope that those standards stay high. But even when we built Parkour UK, it was a big dilemma when we created it, because I remember having many discussions at the start with Stefan and Forrest, and Blaine and Eugene. Eugene obviously came from a different world, but and our discussions at the start were very much like, how do we make sure that this doesn't get hijacked? How do we make sure that 20 years down the line this doesn't get diluted and twisted and made into something that is just mediocre and perpetuating the same kind of mediocrity you see in so many other walks of life in the world? How do we make sure it doesn't go down that road? And we kind of realized that, well, actually we can't. All we can do is set the standards high now, and try and create a culture around that, and then hope that that future generations embody that and maintain it. But we can't say it because it's a democratic body, so eventually we won't be in charge of it, and people may want to change that, so we can't. So we just sort of said, well, we basically give it our best shot, unfortunately, I'm sure you don't want to go into this, but unfortunately, very quickly after the founding members left Parkour UK, from my perspective, very quickly it began to dilute, super quickly. And that was a bit of a shame. It's not that it's not doing good, and hopefully now, I think with the people now it's got a real chance of doing some really awesome stuff. But very quickly it did dilute, I think, and that was a shame to see. So.
Yeah. A lot there.
That's obviously my perspective.
No. I'm just saying in general. Yeah, there's a lot to process there. I'd say we're coming up to an hour and a half now. So, so for people listening or watching, where are some good places to look for research, for coaching development, books, people to follow, people to listen to? You have a few minutes to plug away.
Obviously, adaptqualifications.com is the global sort of parkour, the original parkour coaching certifications that are still out there. They're delivered in around 40 countries worldwide, and they're pretty. The tutor body there now is really, really strong. There's so many amazing tutors running those courses. I would definitely recommend, if you're into coaching parkour, even if you're not into coaching parkour, go to the level 1 if you're just into coaching in general. Because the tutors running those courses worldwide, in the States, in Australia now, in South America, in Europe, are phenomenal coaches and practitioners. They really are. I don't run so many of them now because I don't have so much time, but the tutors are awesome. So you learn so much from those people. So that, I think, is a great resource for all coaches. And obviously Parkour Generations, we operate branches around the world, and we try to maintain those high standards of coaching and the original sort of concepts of parkour in our teaching, while also adapting to modern ideas and upgrading. But beyond that, there's a lot of great coaching resources out there. So a guy I know called Nick Winkelman, he's the strength and conditioning coach for Ireland Rugby at the moment. He's originally an American NFL coach, strength and conditioning coach. He's just released a book called The Language of Coaching, which is, if you're into coaching and cueing, I think is a must read. It's the first comprehensive work that I'm aware of on the concept of cueing and psycholinguistics and social linguistics in coaching. And he was a student of Gabrielle Wolf, who was the woman who originally coined the term cueing for coaching in physical discipline. So that, I think, should be standard reading. So actually, I prefer to plug these other people. So Nick's work is great. There's so much good resources on coaching and teaching now. I would say look into Go online and search books like The Tao of Coaching, the Little Book of Big Coaching Models. These sort of books that are really around even the constraints-led model of motor skill acquisition, which is a really big sort of boring book, but those books, go into them, study them, read them, and you'll come away with really interesting understanding of things, which will probably expand your view of coaching. But mainly for new coaches, I would say practice is the most important thing. Same with anything. Same with training parkour. Same with learning to drive. Practice is the thing that will make you really good. So get out there and practice, and just be confident enough to fuck up. Don't worry about the fact that you are going to make mistakes as a coach. Don't worry about that. Just make the mistake and then don't make it again. By having your open feedback loop. Review it, realize it was a mistake, think, how can I fix it? Don't do it again, right? So don't worry about making mistakes. You're going to do that. But practice is the key, is the way to get better at anything. So get out there, practice, learn from other coaches, spend time with other coaches, be humble in your approach, and make it your craft. Immerse yourself in it, read books, watch videos, go to other sports, practice, make it your craft, see it as a vocation. Don't just think because I can do something well, I can teach it well. This is not correct. You may need to be able to do it well in order to be able to teach aspects of it well. You may need to be able to model it. You may need to understand the biomechanics. So you may need to be able to do it well in order to be able to teach it well. But just doing it well does not automatically make you a good teacher of that thing. So see coaching as a craft, and get into it. And the only thing that's going to make you do that is passion. You're going to have to love it. You're going to have to actually have it's got to have meaning for you. If it doesn't, you won't immerse yourself in it, and you may end up staying in it, but you'll end up being crap at it, or uninspiring. So the first question is, do I want to do this? I would say as a coach, why am I doing this? Why am I trying to coach? If you've got a good answer for that inspires you and you're passionate about, then dive in.
Great. Well, we'll end it there. That was a really fascinating talk, Dan. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure I will listen carefully back to that episode. And for those that are listening, a lot of
rambling, so I wouldn't, maybe not, but
rambling's okay. I think rambling's. I can be like that as well. Just trying to pull some threads from the tangle. That sort of thing.
And to be fair, that's what you asked for. You did say let's have a rambling conversation rather than sort of pinpoint questions, which I can also do. But you said let's ramble, so you got rambling.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So for those listening or watching, if you're on Spotify, you can roll on to the next episode, which was with Chris Grant from Parkour UK. So it might be interesting to listen to that, especially after this episode. You can find that on Spotify, you can find that on YouTube. All the links for Dan, for Adapt, for Parkour Generations, I will put them all either below for YouTube or above for Spotify, and you can follow those. Go and check out what they're doing. And yeah, I think that's about it. Give me a lot to think about. So thank you very much, Dan. And
thank you, Sam. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk and to have someone to ramble at. But no, I mean, it's a really cool podcast you're doing. We need more like this. Like really good, good, consistent podcasts like this for the parkour world. I think a really cool thing. So, and I know how hard it is to create a podcast and keep it going and keep the content rolling out. That is hard work. So kudos for doing that and pulling it off. Good job and great work on making coaching your vocation, or a big part of your vocation. That's super cool.
Appreciate that. All right, well, from me, goodbye. Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you again, Dan.
Thank you.
Till next time.